Welcome to another edition of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. It is a beautiful Monday here, and we have a beautiful guest. Brian, how are you doing today, my friend?
Dude, I'm fantastic. The fact that I get to spend a little bit of time with you on your birthday is like a celebration and a gift in and of itself. So happy birthday. Thanks for having me here with you today. And dude, I'm just so grateful after, I'm pretty sure, wasn't it Dave Folk that connected us, right?
Yeah,
We've had some awesome conversations. So I'm really looking forward to jumping in with this.
yeah, absolutely. So we'll get to what you do and how many lives you've changed and everything and how your life has changed. But we often like to start out with a hard-hitting question. So you often talk about the importance of raising awareness and lowering judgment, right? Can you share a personal story where this shift made a significant impact on your life and how others can apply this on their journeys?
Yeah. Well, I'll just jump right into a really strong, hard hitting one, right? I think so often we are raised in places where we learn to start to defend and protect ourselves because of criticism, judgment, shame, and how the world shapes us, right? And so a lot of what I also do today allows me to recognize that there are often times where we're reacting in moments to something that has nothing to do with what's right in front of us. What happens in awareness for a lot of people is they raise their level of self-awareness, but then they become more aware of all the ways that they should just be judging themselves, right? Instead of being able to understand, like, how do we actually tangibly have something that we can start to move through so that we can make a change and make it different. Here's a great example, right? My wife used to say something as simple as this: hey honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend? But my shame and anger filter caused me to hear it this way: hey honey, you're not doing enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend?
Wow.
Okay. So in this process of trying to raise my awareness to step into being the best husband and father that I could be, I also had a lot of judgment, because what did I actually hear? I felt like I was being challenged, and now all of a sudden, what do I have to do? I have to defend the fact that I'm a good husband and father to my wife when that wasn't even what she asked. So what do? I'd rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last 4 days to show her I'm a good husband and father. Right. And then I'm riddled with shame because I'm sitting here like, man, I'm not doing a good enough job, even though I know I'm a good husband and father. But now I've also reacted and created damage. Okay.
Wow.
Part of raising awareness in this type of an approach without getting judgment is to start to recognize that the trash from my past is not my fault. It just becomes my responsibility once I become aware of it. Right. And so her attempts to try to bring this to my insights would often be met with defense because I felt it was a place of judgment, when in reality, it was information that I could do something with. And so now I'm in a position, through a lot of the frameworks and methodologies, that I can raise my awareness, which is what we call flipping the lid, to be able to highlight anything that's risen to the top without any judgment or shame. And now if my wife says something to me that triggers me, or I feel that, I can just simply own it in the moment and raise awareness for both of us and say, hey, I was just triggered by what you just said, which tells me maybe I didn't hear you correctly. Could you please restate it? And I'll try to hear it through a more neutral lens. And if I'm not capable of doing so, maybe we can pause this conversation and revisit it later so that we don't create any damage. Right? I could judge myself, shame myself for the fact that I'm getting triggered in a moment that's actually completely neutral in front of me. Or I can just own the fact that this is a part of my emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that still in moments causes my cells to react to something that isn't having anything to do with what's in front of me. Right?
Beautiful.
That's how we can start to escape judgment.
So, Brian, where did this, this is a simple question, right? What are you doing with what are we going to do with the kids this weekend? That's a pretty simple question. Where did all this shame and trigger response come from?
Yeah, so there's multiple different sources, but I'll give you the highlight reel of some of it. When I was 7, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn from my body.
Wow.
It was reattached, and ultimately 24 surgeries. I say that in a really simplified way, but what I also have to pause and just recognize for everybody is it doesn't matter whether it's a big T or a little t trauma. We all have things that happen to us. What's important is we learn to pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those situations so we can become intentional moving forward. But when I came out of the hospital, I had a teddy bear in between my arm, and this is one of the sources of my shame, right? And this teddy bear in between my arm, it's because my arm had to heal at 90 degrees. People would always come up to me like, Brian, what happened to you? They were expecting me to say something like, well, I was racing my brother down the street on our bikes and I crashed, or I flew off the jungle gym, right? Like a normal 7-year-old story. But instead, I'd look them deadpan in the eye and say, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. Now, those people, 99% of them would pause and they'd turn to my parents for validation, which told me they didn't believe me.
Oh, wow.
They didn't believe my own truth, right? And then those same people would start to view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately limiting me and telling me all the things I was never going to be able to do. So from 7 years old, in those really profound moments, I started to believe that no matter what my truth is, even if I'm living and existing and wearing it publicly for people to see, that it's still not going to be accepted and believed. And so it started to make me often approach life through this lens of I needed to justify, defend, and prove versus be able to just be and allow whatever's happening around me to exist simultaneously.
Would you actually have people that said listed off the stuff you wouldn't be able to do?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, literally, they'd be like, "Oh, like, oh, so you're probably never gonna be able to ride a bike again. Oh, so you're like, oh, obviously you're not gonna be able to play sports." Uh, all the time. And still today this happens. I mean, people will learn about my story and then they're like, "Oh, it must be really difficult or you must not be able to do this." And I'm like, "Actually, I can do a lot more than you think." Right? But how many people have felt limited, judged, and criticized or not seen and understood within their own truth, regardless of what it is. Whether it's a woman, whether it's a person of color, whether it's somebody who's got a rare form of dwarfism, or they happen to be on the spectrum. Like any time that we aren't seen and understood, and we aren't absolutely fully connected with those that are in front of us, or we are in a category that's different, there's many people that learn how to be the only one in many of the rooms they walk into. Right. And when people don't understand and they can't see themselves in your position, that's all they view you through is all the things that they wouldn't be able to do in your own situation.
So, Brian, that when you were a kid and that happened to you, I know you and I kind of teach a lot in the same ways, and we agree a lot on the same principles. So, in that scenario, that was a learned emotional behavior that was stuck in your implicit mind. Can you explain to people, whether they drink or overeat or have a shitty marriage or have depression, anxiety, how most of the time it's from these learned emotional learnings that we have as a kid?
Yeah. You know, the biggest thing that I say, and I embedded it in my first answer, is that we talk often about the trash from people's past. What is the trash from people's past? It's connected to the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that have created sets of beliefs in our lives that have only been further validated by our lives. Right. And what I do in most situations with people is I'm actually unpacking things 40, 50, 60, 70 years later after they've had these unconscious patterns embedded in their lives. Right. And so I could give multiple different examples, but here's the reality. When I said that the trash from your past is not your fault, it just becomes your responsibility. Once you become aware of it, you start stepping on, or you start burying others in yours. It's because the trash from your past is genetically passed down. They've proven that trauma passes through the DNA. It's been demonstrated that you're actually inheriting a lot of these same patterns. My wife and I traced our triggers back 3 generations in our family and could understand where the source of certain belief systems, whether it's around money or relationships or worth, are traced back. Now, what is the problem is that so many of us live in this state of consciousness, which we believe we see and understand everything so clearly, yet we still feel like victims and like life is fate and we're just happenstance into what's taking place. But until we go through that systematic process of starting to move the unconscious to the conscious, we can't actually escape the patterns. We have to get to the sources of where these things were created. Another area where my shame was created and it came out as external control to my wife early on in our relationship is that I was raised in a house where there was one right way to do everything. Right? I'm also somebody that learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, which meant that it was contingent upon what I did for people instead of who I was, which starts to separate us further and further from ourselves. And so we often unconsciously are reacting in moments that we have no idea what it's about. And it's because it's activating cellular memory from moments earlier in our life that are actually connected to maybe how our dad looked at us when we loaded our dishwasher incorrectly when we were 8. And now it's created this whole divide in my worth and my ability that 40 years later in my career is still showing up. See, it's these early situations. The trash from our past is typically formed in the first 7 to 14 years of our lives. And then most people never find a way to escape it.
Yeah, I mean, I've read and studied that it actually starts in the third trimester that
It does.
the implicit memory starts to lock in. Yeah, this is phenomenal stuff, and it's a shame more people don't talk about it, because it changed my life and it changed your life.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to the person who's listening to this saying like, well, how can this be? Shouldn't we just get over it? And really, can trauma really be passed from generation to generation? How would you answer that question?
Well, what I laugh to that only because I'm like, great, you're just perpetuating all the toxic narratives of society that have kept you stuck and feeling like garbage half of the time, right? If you really want to continue to feel triggered, low frequency energy and emotion, feel like crap, feel like garbage, then continue to just ignore the shit out of it and you can live the life that you want. Here's what happened for me though. Shame and anger showed up in my life in a way that almost cost me everything and everyone I ever cared about. Right? It showed up in a way that I was honestly stuck and I would be in this tense, tight, aggravated state. But I had my edge and I was afraid I was going to lose my edge for so long, right? Because that edge is what got me there, right? And here's the reality. It kept me from actually experiencing joy, freedom, and fulfillment. It kept me from being connected with myself and with those that I love. And here's the reality, whether you're aware of it or not, you have protective behaviors and tendencies that are protecting elements of pain from earlier in your life that will and are disconnect you from who you are and what you want in this world. So if we think about this through the lens of the human experience, we all seek and desire four things, right? We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected, and those are not the same thing. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to feel connected. These last two are the two we want the most, but they don't happen unless the first two do. So if you're unconsciously protecting, what could that look like? Well, I'm walking into an environment where I don't feel seen and understood. I don't feel protected. So I'm going to protect myself. It could be a networking event where everybody's handing out business cards and everybody wants something from you instead of for you. It could be going back to your family's house for Thanksgiving and your aunt and your grandma and your dad have always every year for 30 years made you feel a certain way. And 2 weeks out, you start stressing about it and not wanting to go there and your armor starts going up. It could be an argument with a spouse or a coworker that causes you to not see something clearly. But the second we don't feel seen and understood, we protect ourselves. Imagine those 35-gallon black trash bags. Unfold one and hold one up in front of you. Now I'm going to ask you, who in your life you care most about communicating with and connecting with? Often people, it's a spouse, it's a kid, it's maybe somebody in their business. How could you properly expect anybody to see who you are, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your heart, your intent, your desire, your soul, your boundaries, delivered through an opaque force field that you probably aren't even sure you're carrying? Oh, and that's assuming that they're not carrying their own level of armor that's going to further dilute the message. The second we protect ourselves, we guarantee we won't get the two things we want most, which is to be seen and understood and connected at the deepest level. So if you want to continue to push through and push down, to ignore like the world has told you and just get over it, you're going to live a largely disconnected life and you're going to feel it and experience it for what it is, which is empty.
Yeah, I've heard several, I'm friends with several Latino gentlemen, and they're like, yeah, in our culture, we just get over it. And I'm like, no, you don't. No culture just gets over it. What you said, the word protection is so interesting. We see so similar this world and mindset and views, is that every negative thing in anybody's life is an attempt to protect them from something that they think is worse. And that
Bingo.
thing that they think is worse, as you know, Brian, is always nothing more than an untruth. It's just like your example. You came up with, I can't tell the truth because no one's going to believe me. Well, that was an untruth. And that dictated and created all of these negative things in your life that almost ruined you. So what we do is we just go show your beautiful brain that this thing that's driving this negative behavior that you've tried forever to change and you can't, it's just nothing more than untruth. And when you show your brain that, it goes ding, ding, ding. This is a mismatch. Okay, I don't have to live this anyway. I don't have to live under this untruth. And then the negative thing just vanishes. It's
That's
like,
right.
why don't more people?
For perspective, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off on your question, bro.
Why don't more people know this and practice this? And it's all this mumbo jumbo about like, oh, you've got anxiety. Let's just take you through some breathing work or go to meditate, or it just doesn't work.
Or if you just have a good mindset, then everything's gonna be okay. Or if you just find a way to be grateful, then you're gonna be all right. Like,
yeah.
Now, here's the reality. It's because it's perpetuating these messages that just ultimately are surface level. And they're perpetuating messages that are designed in lots of cases by a lot of what I'm going to call coaches and influencers that are trying to create good in the world. But what they're really doing is highlighting scarcity and pain in a way that gets people to lean into their programs and then become dependent on their programs. Because people look for strategy and tactics versus a way to actually escape the same patterns that are happening unconsciously in our lives. There's not healthy models for this in lots of cases. And so this is where it just gets absolutely crushing for me, is again, toxic masculinity. It's connected to this idea of men have to be tough. They can't show emotion. They can't be vulnerable. They can't be real. They can't cry. Well, the reality of it is again, we've got this concept that we call the strong spine and soft front. It's to become the protector and connector, right? And it's the whole idea of it is, look, if I know who I am, what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, my heart, my soul, my desires, my boundaries, everything else, I can have a strong spine, meaning I can be unwavering in any environment because I don't need to defend anything.
Yeah.
Which then allows me to lower my armor to open my heart. And when I visualize this, I always think of my wife and my kids. Because if they want to come to me to get consoled or just to have love, leadership, light, or just fun, do they want to come be around dad and put their head down on a metal chest piece of armor? No.
No way.
They want to feel my meat, my chest, and they want to actually do this. But the world does not teach these things. But here's where it can go. Okay. I used to spend months and years in anger, fear, shame, and complete lockup. Months and years. Like when I say that, it's not an understatement. Then I started to learn about these things and it started to become months and weeks. Then it started to become weeks and days. Then it became days and hours. And today I'm human. So do I still get triggered? Yeah. I had 2 moments this weekend that I got triggered in a moment with my wife. I still get triggered. But here's the difference. I spend minutes and moments in it instead of losing months and years of my life. And if I look at what this can do at a cellular level, just to give some perspective, I lived in physical pain daily for nearly 31 years. Here's the crazy part. I'm a year and 2 months with zero physical pain. And when people ask me, what did you do differently to get your body out of pain? Well, it's the deepest level of healing and congruence I've ever had in my life. But what I know for a fact now is that my physical pain was merely a manifestation of emotional pain that I'd not been able to reach or dug deep enough to get to. And it wasn't until I unpacked it that my pain evaporated.
Man, I mean, I was smiling and laughing because you literally could have been talking about me, not the physical pain, but everything else, how I lived in shame and how I needed drugs and alcohol to feel better in social situations. There is a buddy of mine, Mark Mincola, who wrote a book, fabulous book, and it's actually a documentary. Gosh, I'm blanking on it. It'll come to me in a second. But he says the opposite of self-love is self-contempt. And self-contempt breeds dis-ease, your body not being in an ease state. And then dis-ease breeds dis-ease. So you either take care of your problems or the universe and nature will take care of them through drug addiction, alcoholism, or death, eventually cancer, Parkinson's, something. It's going to get you. So you can do the work now, or you and shed the, just get over it. It was something in my past, or you can do the work because you know this, Brian. The only way to heal true mental pain or physical pain is you got to go to the source. You got to go to the source. And so much of this world, like you said, I think you use the terminology surface level, right? Everyone wants to touch around on the surface level. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I wonder if I have some of this stuff from my past and you want to know, I created a quiz for you to take that literally will take you 2.5 minutes. Go to bradchandler.com/quiz. It's going to redirect you to our new website. It's Unlock Limitless You, but it's an easier URL. So just go to bradchandler.com/quiz. And what Brian said is, with awareness, you can't. What you said earlier was really interesting. If you have awareness, but you don't know what's driving it, then it's almost like it's even worse. So whether you work with Brian or myself, once you gain the awareness of what is triggering you when your wife says something simple like, hey, what are we doing with the kids? When you figure that out and you go to the source of that and you heal that, it's not just that one area of your life that's going to change. Look at you, Brian. Not only did your marriage get better, your relationship with your kids get better, but this pain that you were living with for years, it's gone.
Yep.
It's a beautiful thing.
And we have a framework, and one of our core philosophies that we've been teaching for about a decade is this idea of embracing pain to avoid suffering, right? And I believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us. And here's the reality. Suffering is when we don't deal with anything, and it starts to perpetuate and build these patterns that start closing us off, shutting us off, and creating these areas where we're blocked and in pain. The reality of it is like we can embrace the pain of doing the work that's necessary to look inside to avoid the suffering of being stuck and lost for the rest of our lives. Right? We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of being stuck in a loveless marriage or being trapped in one when we really want out, right? Like the list goes on. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation we won't get back. As business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of losing all our other top talent and having stagnation because they were also the greatest cancer in our culture, right? Like this goes on and on and on and on. But until we bring it into a place of conscious awareness, we don't know what to do with it. And we just end up becoming more aware of the ways that we should be judging ourselves versus actually having a pragmatic way to move through life. That's what we're trying to get people to do.
I heard this on a YouTube video sitting in the sauna earlier today. You are awareness that sees your pain, but you aren't your pain.
Yeah, that's right.
At our essence, we create these parts that create the shame based on like your example. So Brian's got this essence he was born with that's pure and nothing but love and light, and then he goes through this accident that creates this story in his life, and but that's not him. That's his part trying to protect his essence. So if everyone, it's I don't know if you've ever studied parts therapy, but it's internal family systems. It's like you've got this essence, and then all of the shit around you that's creating this negative, it's just trying to protect your essence. But your essence has just always been pure if you can just recognize that. And that's what you talk about when we reconnect. All we're really reconnecting with is our essence, right?
It's the truth. Yeah. I mean, again, I think we're all born as our brightest, most authentic burning lights will ever be. And then parents, teachers, coaches, employers start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, you should want this, you shouldn't want this, you should be this, you shouldn't be this. Should in and of itself is a shame-based word because it implies whoever you are and whatever you're doing, you're not good enough. So what do most people do? We start funneling ourselves down this path that's being guided for us until we fit inside the box of who the world has told us who to be instead of actually honoring who we are. But what we often talk about in exact correlation to what you just said is that for every coinciding level of pain that we experience in life, we acquire and develop a correlated layer of armor, right? And so at the end of the day, what are we doing? We're identifying and healing layers of pain so we can shed associated layers of armor and get closer and closer back to the core of who we are, the essence of us, which we're all born with. We just often forget or shut it down because we've been told it's not good enough.
Brian, for someone who feels like completely overwhelmed by the current circumstances or situation or whatever they're going through, can you provide some actionable tips that will help pivot from this feeling stuck to creating wealth and value in their life and business?
Yeah, so I'll give a really, really low hanging fruit one. There's many different directions we can go with this, but I find this is one that helps a lot of people get clarity. I just want people to make 2 lists. Okay. I want you to write down on one list all the people, places, sources of information, environments that you go to that leave you feeling uplifted, full of love, full of light, full of energy, that you could spend 8 hours there and it feels like 1. You can't wait to get back. You can't wait to be with those people, be in those places and learn what you are, that you feel energized and moved. Everybody knows what that feels like, right? Write down the list of all the things in your life currently that provide that for you. Now on the counter list, I want you to write down all the people, places, sources of information, and environments that leave you feeling defeated, depleted, unworthy, disconnected, that you could spend 8 hours there, but it actually feels like 80 hours. That 1 hour in, you're already banging your head against the wall and you do not want to go back to see those people, be in those places, or absorb those environments. Now all you have to do from those 2 lists is start to systematically identify, how do I spend more and more and more on the positive side of the list? How do I repair, remove, or reconcile with those that are over here, right? Inevitably, there's going to be people in your family or certain relationships that you're not going to want to say goodbye to, but you can start to create containers and set effective and healthy boundaries so that you, yourself, your essence can maintain and live in the places that love and light exist for you. The issue is most people don't even understand the percentage of time that they are either investing or spending or wasting in either one of those 2 categories. That simple exercise will give you clarity more on who you are and what your essence is, just based on how your energy responds to those situations and environments.
And just because they're a family member doesn't mean you can't set boundaries with them. If they're taking your energy down or they're making you feel shameful or no good, you can set boundaries and say, no, enough is enough. If you're going to talk to me this way, I can't talk to you anymore. I don't want to talk to you anymore.
Yeah. Completely.
So, Brian, I know you've helped a lot of people and changed a lot of lives. Is there a success story, a particular success story that kind of stands at the top of the pile when you think about all the people you've helped?
Yeah, there are many, but there's one that I really like to tell because it really covers a whole variety of topics simultaneously. And it's a little dated at this point. I say dated only because I haven't worked with the guy in over a year and a half, but it was an amazing time that we did work together. We started our engagement in September of 2020, right? 6 months into COVID. This individual was in the commercial real estate business. He did development, property management, and investing, right? Now, those three categories were all great. He had an amazing team. It had taken him 6.5 years to build his company to about $1.8 million, about 25 people on his team at the time. But here's where he found himself. He found himself being absolutely gutted by the market and the economy, and had convinced himself that he had 17 months of liquidity left in his business. He believed they were going out of business. He was also 40 to 50 pounds overweight. He was drinking excessively. He lived in the same house that he had for the prior 10 years that they thought was only going to be a 2 to 3 year home. And now their little boys are young men and they're all on top of each other and they don't have the space that they need, right? He's unhealthy. And this is a guy that rode his bike from coast to coast in the United States more than once in his youth.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, he's also feeling completely disconnected from his business because he's on the tail end of a $600,000 settlement where he got completely screwed, and he owed himself over $250,000 that he foregoed to pay and stabilize his team.
Whoa.
So White hired, and within 2 weeks of working with him, he had communicated to his team that he had 17 months of liquidity left and that they all needed to start looking for other jobs.
Oh, Lord.
Okay. Because he cared about it.
That would make a good culture.
Right. Right. But what did he do? He's like, I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that all this takes place. In the following 3 months, we did a lot of deep work. We unpacked and we got to the source of his shame, which had to do with a dynamic of relationship between his brother and his father that showed up with any male figures in his life that represented or resembled either of those two, which would cause him to immediately shrink, not actually ask for what he's worth, which would affect their fundraising. It would affect their deal structures. It would affect their flow into their business. And he was a control freak because he felt like he'd been abandoned so many times that he held on to everything. Okay, let me just give you the rundown of where this went. 15 months later, I remind you, it took him 6.5 years to generate $1.8 million of revenue, and he thought he was going out of business. 15 months later, this was the result. They had added over $2 million of growth to their business. They completed 2 8-figure fundraising rounds to close on 2 deals that they had never done. They did them back to back within 30 days. He netted over 600 grand himself in that last year. On top of that, he added raises, added new lines of benefits to his teams. He started working out again and riding his bike about 100 to 125 miles a week. I don't know where these balloons and
I don't either. Isn't that amazing?
Must love the story, right? He ultimately stopped drinking. They ended up finally acquiring the home that they had desired. And the list just keeps going on, right? Like his entire life and ecosystem changed. And in the last 2 years, since the time that we worked with them, their business has doubled yet again. Okay. We put in the systems, the structure. We helped him hire and identify the teams that were needed so that he could learn to actually let go. And we went through the process of actually communicating and understanding how to unwind these patterns, and would prepare into going into every major meeting that he had so that he was in the right energy state. He's living in this way, sustainability today. But this is the crazy part. 15 months unwound 50 years of patterns for him. Didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like he decided that this was going to be the case, and he's still working through some of these resonant memories still today. But the coolest part about it is he and his wife were planning to come to one of our retreats last year. They didn't end up coming just because the dates didn't work, but I had never gotten a chance to speak to his wife. She'd sent me an email about 9 months into working with her saying, "What have you done with my husband? Who is he? Like, he's communicating. He's talking about his feelings. Like, we're connecting. We have more intimacy." And I'd never met her other than that one email. We get on the call, and the first thing she says to me is, "Brian, we wouldn't have our house. We wouldn't have our home. We wouldn't have our life if it wasn't for the work you did with my husband, helping him identify and remove the trash from his past."
Beautiful. So for those of you listening who aren't watching, as Brian was explaining all the success that this guy had, a bunch of balloons came up. If you asked me to recreate, I have no idea how that happened, but it's interesting. And then on the screen now, we've got your behavior is driven by your subconscious mind. So everything we've been talking about these first 29 minutes, Brian, you just kind of summarized it with that client. He was being driven and had all this negative behavior and fear, and his marriage wasn't good. And I don't know what his relationship with his kids was, but it probably wasn't great. It was all driven by subconscious programming that was put into play some 30 years ago. And people are
Mhm.
like, this stuff is woo woo. No, it's not woo. And just like you said earlier, Brian, if you want to keep believing that your way is the right way, then you're going to keep having shitty relationships and bad business operations. And
Yep.
but there is a better way, and it's amazing. That was quite an incredible story, and good work there, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as we wrap up and wind down this episode, I mean, we could literally talk. We've said this before. We could talk for 24 hours. There's so much we can unpack. And I asked you the best questions I could come up with. What have I not asked you that you think would be really invaluable and important for listeners to know about how they can, have a better and more joyous life?
Yeah. I'm going to give a very short master's class on how to start doing some of this for yourself, but it's going to require you to get into your bodies and how you're listening. It's the fifth pillar in our 5 pillars of waste to wealth, and it's move. It's this idea of how do these emotions move through you? How do they move through your world so that you can move through them? Okay. Now, to your point, many people think this is woo woo, but I've said for years that if we don't feel, we don't heal. It's been proven and shown scientifically that there's 40,000 cells in the heart that are called sensory neurites. They're brain-like cells that carry cellular memory. And if you go through the intellectual pattern of unpacking the patterns of your past alone, and you don't embody the associated emotions, that those 40,000 cells don't heal, and you actually will remain in the same patterns. Now, when I say move through your body, shame moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways. Sometimes it causes me to shrink down. Sometimes it causes me to raise up, right? I've had to actually pay attention to how it shows up in my body differently. My heart rate, my breath rate, my everything. Anger shows up in my body 6 different ways. It's taken years to be able to map this and understand this. And this is a master's level that I don't do right away with our clients, but I want you to understand what's possible. Okay. Here's the reality. Once you understand how it moves through your body and you can start to catch those moments, you realize it's happening real time. Then you can start to trigger map and identify, i.e., the moments that it's moving through your world. Where are you getting triggered? I have over 50 shame triggers that I'm aware of and over 60 anger triggers that I'm aware of. Why is that important? Because what happens when my doorbell goes off and my 2 yippy Chihuahua blended breeds start going off? My sensory overload goes through the roof, and it presents itself in my body as anger because I want to scream, shut up to the dogs, right? But if I don't catch that relatively quickly and realize what I'm reacting to in that moment, what happens when one of my 2 special needs kids jumps in my lap 5 minutes later? If I haven't already done the work to separate from the cellular memory that's within my body, then I can't actually escape it. And so here's what I want everyone to do. Even if you can't map your triggers, everyone knows what it feels like to get triggered. I want you to ask yourself 3 questions the next time you get triggered. Is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me or the trash from my past? By the way, a little hint, 99% of the time it's the second.
I'm going to say
The second,
99.9%.
I was trying to give a little bit of margin for those that aren't going to believe, but I'm almost there to say 100% most of the time. Yeah. Here's the thing. Second question is, what am I protecting right now? See, if you listen back to the beginning, first part of this answer, when I was asked about the awareness and judgment, I talked about reacting in a moment with my wife. What was I protecting in that moment? I was protecting the fact that I care a lot about being a good husband and father, and I felt like that was being challenged externally. Right? But once you can understand what you're protecting, and to the point of what you said, Brad, around this idea of protecting ourselves, and we're actually protecting ourselves against things that actually are untruths, right? Those first 2 questions can help you separate from the moment. The last, if you still have not successfully brought yourself back to neutral or not reacted, is, am I safe right now? Am I physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally safe? Most situations in this world, the answer to that question is going to be yes. And so if you can answer yes, I am safe, objectively and non-judgmentally, then you can allow yourself to center, let that energy leave, take a breath and let it go, and be present in the current moment.
Man, Brian, I mean, drop the mic, right? That was amazing. And I'm going to take that just a step further is you can throughout the day just remind yourself you're safe, because anytime you're in a triggered state, you're in fight or flight. You're looking for the line that's going to bite you. And so all you have to do is literally just ground yourself, take a couple deep breaths and say, I'm safe. I'm safe. I'm safe. Whether it's you're in a conflict with your wife and she says something and you like shut down, like have gotten a lot better, but I still struggle with it. I just have to tell myself, it's okay, I'm safe, because your brain is saying there's danger here. You better not talk. You better not talk,
Yep.
because if you talk, you might get love taken from you. And if you get love taken from you and your child, that could result in death. So this is all
It's
about
deeper than the brain, though, Chad. I gotta take this just further, because what you just said also just put me here. This is a direct correlation to our nervous systems and its whole purpose for existence. Our nervous systems are in place to anticipate threat and risk and keep us safe, right? And it is a reactionary cellular thing that's visceral, and fight, flight, fawn, or freeze are states of survival. Now, here's the reality. 100 years ago, if you cut your leg, you could die. That's not the reality in most places in the world today. And our nervous systems are actually reacting to things that are not real, they're perceived. Yeah. And so it's time for us to update our operating systems and realize that it's not just a brain function, it's actually a nervous system function that connects our brains, our hearts, and our spirits and puts it into motion, because that is ultimately what's going to happen. And I want everyone to remember this. Even if it's a reaction that you feel like is visceral and you cannot control, if it's not in alignment with your real intent and who you are, remember this. The world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will always judge you based on your actions, many of which are rooted in reactions. So do you want to be judged based on what's real and true, or judged based on what's conditioned and untrue? I guess the choice becomes yours.
Love it. Love it. Brian, thank you so much. That was some powerful stuff, man. I know you do great work in this world, and just continue to do it.
Man, I'm grateful to be here with you, and even more grateful to be able to spend some time on your birthday with you to celebrate everything that's celebratable, my friend. You deserve all the goodness in the world, and thanks for having me on today.
Thank you. And I'm on a mission to help 1 million people. So you, the listener, I need your help. Please help me spread this message by liking, subscribing, sharing, anything you can do to get this word out, because there's so many people suffering in our world, and most of it self-inflicted. And Brian and myself have this amazing way to get them out of suffering. So do what you can. Until next time, love heals all.